After her fiancé traded her for a richer heiress, she married the vampire king, unaware he ruled an entire empire. What kind of man sells the woman who loved him? And smiles while signing the paper? That night, Rania found out. Not from a letter, not from a rumor. She found out standing 3 feet away, hidden behind a velvet curtain, watching her fiancé's pen move. 3 years, 17 treaties. Every late night, every quiet sacrifice, every time she told herself love is enough, reduced in the end to a number. 50 million pure blood drops. That was what she was worth to Ivar Lockwood. And the worst part? He didn't hesitate, not even for 1 second. The Nocturne Empire ran on blood. Everyone knew it. Not just the blood in crystal goblets at aristocratic banquets. The other kind, too. The quiet labor of humans who drafted laws, tutored children, managed estates, thanked with nothing more than the privilege of being tolerated. Rania had lived inside that arrangement her entire adult life. She had told herself it was fine, that Ivar saw her differently. She had been wrong. The Lockwood Library was cold even in summer. Stone walls, contracts sealed in black wax. A single chandelier casting everything in old amber. Across the mahogany desk, Carmilla Voss sat with the stillness of someone who has never needed to raise her voice. Blonde, precise, the wealthiest heiress in the empire. Her father slid a document forward with 2 fingers. 50 million pureblood drops, the Lockwood debt, erased completely. Ivar picked up the quill. He's going to say no, Rania told herself. He's going to stand up. He's going to... 4 seconds. That's all it took. 4 seconds to unmake 3 years. And Rania, Ivar said, not with guilt, the way you ask about a chair you're leaving behind when you move houses. Carmilla didn't look up from her gloves. Give her something small. Humans like her are only temporary nourishment. Then quieter. And if she causes trouble, the old tailor in the slums will be our next guest. The old tailor. Her mother. Rania's hand pressed flat against the stone wall. Her fingers found the small ivory button in her pocket, cut from the very first garment her mother ever sewed. Keep this so you always remember, beautiful things can come from ordinary hands. She pressed it until she felt the edges cut in. 3 years of making herself smaller, drafting treaties that bore other people's names, smiling at dinners where the nobility looked through her like glass. For what? 1 tear, just one. And somewhere in the falling of it, something shifted. Not grief, something harder. Something that had finally decided it was done being patient. She turned and walked. 8 steps before she hit something that didn't move. Strong hands caught her. She looked up. Tall, black hair threaded with silver, eyes deep red. The color of something ancient that burns slow and never goes out. Fixed on her with an expression she had no name for. Not pity, not curiosity. Recognition. Leaving so soon, Miss Rania? You know my name. I know more than your name. I know you wrote the Halvith Border Treaty. I know the Lockwood family took the credit. I know that tonight your fiancé traded you for a richer heiress, and you didn't make a sound. A beat. I've been watching you for 2 years, not as a hunter. He extended one gloved hand, as someone waiting for you to realize what you're worth. She had nothing left to lose. She took his hand. She didn't yet know his name. She didn't know the hand she was holding had held an entire empire together for 347 years, had never, not once, reached out to anyone like this. A stranger's hand in a dark corridor, 5 seconds after her entire world had been signed away. If you were Rania, would you have taken his hand? Type 1 if yes, type 2 if you would have walked away alone. She had no idea that everything was about to change, and that the man in that dark corridor already knew exactly how the story ended. If you've ever given everything to someone who counted your worth in numbers, stay with Rania. What happens next will make your heart race. After her fiancé traded her for a richer heiress, she married the vampire king, unaware he ruled an entire empire. His name, she learned in the carriage, was Caliph. Just Caliph, no house name, no title. He sat across from her watching the Lockwood estate disappear behind iron gates, the expression of a man watching something he had already finished with. Rania sat with her back straight and told herself she was not afraid. She was, of course, afraid. What are you doing? You took the hand of a stranger because you were angry. You don't know what he is. She knew what he was. The red eyes had told her that much. What she didn't know was why a vampire would be at the Lockwood estate at all. "You're thinking very loudly," he said, without turning from the window. She didn't respond. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, more like the memory of one. "You don't have to trust me, not yet. Only don't run until you've heard what I'm proposing." "And if I don't like it?" "Then I'll return you wherever you'd like. You have my word." The word of a vampire, she thought. 3 years ago, I would have laughed at that. "Talk," she said. Eclipsura Palace arrived without warning. One moment, dark forest. Then the trees broke open, and there it was. Black stone towers rising against the moonlit sky, like something the earth had pushed up from its own depths. Every window glowed faintly red. Every turret edged in iron worked into ancient symbols. Rania stepped out and did not let herself be impressed. Inside, Caliph laid the contract on the table. Eternal blood contract. Embossed in ink, the color of dried roses. 1 year, in name only. In exchange, your mother's debt erased, her safety guaranteed under my seal, and your work bears your name. All 17 treaties, everything after. Why? Because the council is corrupt, and I need someone who understands what reform looks like. You've been doing the work. I'm offering you the credit. What do you get? Legitimacy, a queen both species will believe in. She read every clause, every footnote. She signed. And just like that, a girl who had been sold, dismissed, and forgotten walked into a palace that answered to a king. I still can't get over that. 3 days later, the Moonblood Masquerade. The great hall blazed under 1,000 black candles. The vampire nobility arrived in waves of silk and shadow, every conversation a quiet evaluation. Rania wore emerald and deep red, chosen herself. Because she was done wearing things chosen for her. Her mask was simple, her spine was not. How charming! Humans only know how to write letters, don't they? Good heavens, she said that in front of everyone, every single person in that room. Rania turned. I wrote the Halvith Border Treaty, the Aremian Accord, the Bloodline Taxation Amendment of the Third Council, 14 additional documents whose language you quoted in your own petitions last spring. Which letters were you referring to? The silence that followed was the good kind. Then Ivar Lockwood walked through the door, Carmilla on his arm, the engagement ring catching candlelight like a small act of cruelty. Rania went very still. She had told herself she was prepared. She was not. She pulled the old blood-red ring from her pocket, looked at it once, dropped it on the marble floor. The sound, small, sharp, definitive, silenced a 6-foot radius. "That belongs to the past," she said quietly, and turned away. Calith's hand came to rest lightly at the small of her back. Not possessive, just there. She didn't move away. That was the first crack. Behind them, Carmilla's eyes followed Calith's hand. Not jealousy, calculation. They found each other on the east terrace near midnight. Frost on the stone balustrades, the kind of cold that clarifies things. "How long have you been making yourself smaller so other people could feel larger?" The question landed too close to something she kept covered. She thought of her mother's kitchen, the lamplight, the sewing table, hands moving over fabric. "You don't have to be loud to be right, Rania, but you do have to be present." "Since I was 23, she said. "Since I figured out this empire runs on bloodline, and mine wasn't the right kind." "I was human once," he said. She turned. "Not for a very long time, but I remember what it felt like. A room full of people who had already decided what you were. It doesn't stop feeling like that, even after 300 years. "And 47, he added quietly. "I stopped counting for a while, then I started again." "Why?" He looked at her, and in his red eyes she saw something she hadn't expected. Not power, not strategy. Loneliness, ancient and particular, the loneliness of someone who has watched everyone they knew become history. She looked away first. "Stop it. This is a contract, 1 year. You are here for your mother and nothing else." It arrived the next morning, no seal, slipped under her door before dawn, smelling of Carmilla's perfume. "Step aside, 1 word, and the tailor's shop on Crescent Lane is gone by morning. You have until the next full moon. CV." Rania read it twice, folded it, looked out at the pale sky. The same sky her mother was under, stitching someone else's garments, not knowing her daughter had traded one danger for another. She pressed the ivory button once, twice. Then she sat at the writing desk, pulled out clean vellum, and began drafting. Not a treaty, something more dangerous. A strategy. Carmilla thought she was dealing with a waitress, clearing tables at someone else's banquet. Useful for a moment, easily dismissed. She was about to find out what 3 years of invisible labor actually built. And just when she thought she could trust again, the past returned. Not with a knock, but with a match already lit. Have you ever had to fight for something twice as hard just to be seen? Tell Rania you're with her. Drop a comment below. After her fiancé traded her for a richer heiress, she married the vampire king. Unaware he ruled an entire empire. She found the door on a Tuesday. She had been walking Eclipsera's upper corridor in the early hours, mapping it the way she mapped all unfamiliar territory, methodically, quietly, hand trailing the cold stone wall. Most doors were unlocked. This one was not. Set back slightly from the wall, framed in iron carved with ancient symbols. Standing this close, she realized they weren't decorative. They were instructions. The kind carved when you want something kept, or someone kept out. She found the loose stone 3 inches left of the frame. Behind it, a key the color of old blood. She opened the door. She had expected something sinister. What she found instead was a map room. Floor to ceiling, every wall covered. Not battle maps or territorial claims. Blood maps. Intricate networks of bloodline indices. Population data going back centuries. Hand annotated in 4 scripts. Filing cabinets in black iron. And on the central table, a draft reform of the Nocturne Council's bloodline laws. The reform everyone in Crescent Lane said was impossible. that no one in power would ever seriously pursue. Someone had been pursuing it for decades. The margin note was dated 6 months ago. The handwriting was Kayleith's. "You were not supposed to find this room." She didn't startle. She had heard him coming. "How long?" she asked, eyes still on the map. "The research, 40 years. The active framework, 18. She turned. He stood in the doorway, one hand resting on the iron frame, ink stain at the base of his thumb, the hand of someone who had been writing for a very long time. "You are not just a displaced nobleman," she said. "Not a question." "No? Then what are you?" 4 seconds of silence. He crossed to the central table, opened the bottom drawer, set a document between them, a seal, ancient, black wax, the mark of the Nocturne throne itself. Not the council, not the aristocracy, the throne. "You are the vampire king," she said. "I have been," he said quietly, "for 347 years. 347 years. Lord." She signed a contract with a man who has been ruling an empire since before any country on this map even existed. The room rearranged itself around her, every interaction replayed, every careful word, every deflection when conversations touched power or command. "You disguised yourself. I allowed people to assume." A distinction he made precisely. "The nobility has been governing itself into ruin for 60 years. I needed to see who was worth saving. I could not do that as a figure of absolute power." A pause. "And I could not approach you as a king." That last sentence landed differently from the rest. "Why?" "Because you would have said yes out of fear. I needed you to choose." He was at the Lockwood estate because he knew what was going to happen, she realized. Not a collector, someone who already knew what she was capable of, waiting for the moment she would know it herself. She was not sure she had ever been waited for before. She left without another word. Not from anger, from necessity, the kind that comes when you receive more truth than you can hold while standing still. She walked the east corridor twice, stopped at the far window, the human quarter below, a smudge of warm lamplight in the distance, Crescent Lane somewhere in it, her mother's shop. She pressed the ivory button and felt the familiar edges, and for the first time it gave her nothing back. No steadiness, no warmth, just a small carved object, cool from the stone room. "He is the vampire king, and you signed a contract thinking it was an arrangement between equals." She thought of the terrace, the fountain, the loneliness she had seen in his eyes and told herself she had imagined. 347 years alone. Down the corridor came the sound of a single door closing. Not a contract, she thought, standing in the silence. A history. She found Lumi in the lower kitchen just before dawn. Lumi looked up when Rania entered, did not seem surprised. "You've been to the West Wing," Lumi said. "How much are you permitted to tell me?" Lumi poured 2 cups and sat. 6 months ago, Ivar Lockwood came here on a diplomatic visit. He brought a gift, a rare blood vintage presented as tribute. His Majesty accepted it as custom required. A pause. The vintage had been laced with a slow-acting solar compound. Ancient formula. It doesn't act on the body directly. It works through the bloodline, builds over time. Every day, when light touches him, even reflected light, even the gray before dawn, it burns, not visibly, inside, like fire no one else can see. Rania felt the warmth leave her hands. He has managed it alone since that night, told no one except Xander and myself. Why didn't he find a cure? He's been king for 3 centuries. Lumi's expression did not change, but her hands tightened around the cup. He tried. Every healer in the empire, every ancient text in this library. The compound was designed to resist conventional treatment. It binds to the royal bloodline specifically, which means only something equally rare can dissolve it. Not more power, not more time, something else entirely. She looked at Rania steadily. Something he had no way of knowing existed until you walked through the door. She thought of every moment she had noticed him avoid a window. Step back from a doorway where morning light came through. Keep his back to the east. Details she had filed away without understanding them. The way you file something you know will matter before you know why. How long does he have? Lumi's hands tightened further. The next full moon, 12 days. 12 days. She thought of Carmilla's letter, the deadline written in that careful hand. Until the next full moon. It wasn't a coincidence. Carmilla had known exactly when the compound would reach its peak. She had timed the threat to land when Calith was at his weakest. Get Rania out before she could discover, before she could ask the right questions, before she could become, to the king who had survived 3 centuries, the one thing centuries of governance had never given him. Someone who would stay. He didn't tell me because he was afraid, she realized. Not of the compound, of asking, of needing something from someone and having them leave anyway. 347 years of that. She stood, her tea untouched. Thank you, Lumi, she said quietly. She walked back through the corridor, past the window where she had stood an hour ago. And in that moment she understood the terrible truth. The vampire king who had engineered her rescue, who had watched her for 2 years, who had spent decades building reform and centuries building walls against needing anyone, was running out of time. Quietly, alone, the way he had done everything else. And he had never once intended to ask her for help. If you've ever watched someone carry pain in silence because they didn't believe they were worth saving, you already know what Rania decided next. She sat on the edge of her bed and did not sleep. Outside, the sky was going that shade of gray that is neither night nor morning, the color of something undecided. She placed the ivory button on the bedside table and looked at it. Her mother had given it to her so she would remember. Beautiful things could come from ordinary hands. She had been carrying it as armor, pressing it in moments of fear to remind herself she was not nothing. She had been carrying it wrong. The button wasn't armor. It was her mother's way of saying something else entirely. You do not need to be afraid of needing people. And she had spent years being afraid of exactly that, with her fiancé, and now at Eclipsera. She thought of Calith. 347 years. Every century, everyone he had known had faded, become a name in the records he kept in those iron cabinets. Every reform drafted in the small hours, done alone. Not because he lacked the ability to ask, because he had learned what she had learned in a fraction of the time. That needing someone is the most dangerous thing you can do. We are the same kind of afraid, she thought. That thought cracked something open she had been keeping sealed. She picked up the ivory button, held it, not desperately, just held it, then stood up and went to find him. She found him in the map room. Back to the window, working by lamplight. Documents spread in the concentric pattern she had come to recognize as his thinking, most critical at the center, everything else radiating outward. You should be sleeping, he said. So should you. I don't require as much. Lumi told me. The room went very quiet. He set down the quill, slowly. "How much," he said, "did she tell you?" 12 days. I intended to resolve it before it required you to let someone help you? He looked at her then, full attention, undisguised. The same recognition she had seen in the dark corridor the night she took his hand. "Yes," he said, simply, without pretense. "Why?" He moved toward the window, then stopped, remembering. Turned toward the lamp instead. That small, involuntary correction broke her composure in a way his words had not. Every moment alone, never asking anyone to witness it. "I have watched people leave for 300 years, he said. "I learned not to give them something to stay for. If you didn't know about the compound, you couldn't leave because of it." The logic was devastating, the saddest thing she had ever heard. "Caliph." He waited. "That is not how this works." Xander came in without knocking, looked at both of them, unsurprised. "I owe you both an explanation I should have offered earlier." He set an ancient document on the table, vellum darkened to dried amber, old script, the kind she had been quietly teaching herself to read since her third night at Eclipsera. "What is the ancient equilibrium bloodline?" she asked. "It appears once every 4 centuries, always in a human. Always someone who has lived at the margin of both species, close enough to understand both, belonging fully to neither." He looked at her steadily. "It can dissolve a solar compound that nothing else can touch, willingly given, blood to blood, in the old ritual. And we searched every archive, every healer willing to speak, every text the Empire holds." Xander's voice was measured, even. "The compound was engineered to resist conventional treatment, designed so that only one bloodline could counter it. A bloodline so rare that the person who built this trap assumed it no longer existed." A pause. They were wrong. Rania thought of the night she signed the contract, the warmth traveling through her fingers, the whisper she had heard and dismissed. Blood calls blood. Balance the 2 species. She had filed it as imagination. "I have it," she said, "not a question. Since birth. It is why treaty work came naturally. You see both sides with equal clarity. It is why the nobility has always been unsettled by you without being able to say why. And it is why," Xander glanced at Caliph, "certain people recognized what you were long before you recognized it yourself." She turned to Caliph. His expression was the most unguarded she had ever seen it. The careful fallen entirely away. Not collapse, surrender. The voluntary kind. The kind that takes longer to reach than any other. "You knew. I knew what you were. I didn't know if you would choose to use it. The ritual requires willingness. It cannot be asked for. It must be offered." "Then why didn't you tell me?" "Because it would have meant telling you about the compound. And I had already decided not to do that." "You decided to disappear rather than ask me." "Oh, that silence." "That silence right there. That was 300 years of loneliness answering for itself." He did not deny it. She looked at him, the silver in his hair, the red of his eyes, the ink stain at the base of his thumb, the hand that had been writing alone for centuries. She thought of her fiancé signing without hesitation. 4 seconds to unmake 3 years, and how none of it had unmade her. She reached into her pocket and set the ivory button on the table, beside Xander's document, beside the reform drafts, beside 347 years of solitary work. "My mother gave me this to remind me that ordinary hands can make beautiful things," she said. I think she was also telling me they're not meant to work alone. Caliph looked at the button, then at her. Something in his face changed the way things change when they are finally allowed to. I'm not offering because of the contract, she said. I'm offering because you spent 12 days burning in silence, so I wouldn't have to carry the knowledge. And I am done watching people I care about disappear quietly while I stand in doorways. The lamp burned between them. Outside, the sky moved past gray into the first pale color of morning, and the Vampire King, for the first time, did not step back from it. For the first time in all those centuries of solitary nights, she knew exactly what she had to do. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't fighting for yourself. It's choosing to stay for someone else. Tell someone today that they're not as alone as they think. They performed the ritual in the map room. Not in a grand hall, not under a blood moon, just the two of them. Xander to one side, and Lumi in the doorway, because no one had told her to leave and she had not seen fit to go. The ancient circle drawn in chalk on the stone floor. 12 lines, old geometry, the kind that predated architecture. Xander read the invocation from the amber vellum in a voice that was careful and unhurried. Rania stood inside the circle and did not feel afraid. That surprised her. She had expected fear, the rational fear of a woman about to alter something fundamental about her own blood. Instead, she felt a strange, clean clarity, the kind that arrives when a decision was already made long before you consciously made it. Caliph stood across from her. He had not spoken since she set the ivory button on the table. But he had picked it up. She had watched him do it. It was in his hand now, held the way you hold something you're not yet certain you deserve. You don't have to. I know, that's why I'm here. She offered her hand, palm up. He crossed the circle and took it. Not the way he had taken it at Lockwood Estate. Not as a proposition between strangers. This time he held it the way you hold something you have been wanting for a long time. Something you have finally, at some cost to your pride, allowed yourself to have. His skin was cold. The warmth traveled from her outward. Not the faint current from the night she signed the contract. Something deeper, deliberate. She felt it move into something cold that had been burning for 6 months and begin, quietly, to dissolve. She watched his face. She saw the exact moment the pain eased. The chalk circle faded. Xander folded the vellum. Lumi made a very small sound she immediately suppressed. Outside, through the high window, the dawn arrived, warm and gold, pressing against Eclipsera's stone walls without apology. Caliph turned toward it and stood there and did not burn. I have to stop for a second, because after everything he carried alone, in silence for 6 months, watching him simply stand in the morning light without flinching, that broke me a little. The grand investiture ball convened 6 days later under a full crimson moon. For the first time, someone stood beside the throne who had not been placed there by bloodline, but by the oldest credential there is, the willingness to see clearly and act accordingly. Rania stood at Caliph's right hand and did not adjust her posture for the weight of the hall's attention. When Ivar and Carmilla were escorted forward, the charges were read. Conspiracy to introduce a harmful compound into the royal household, orchestrated through deception and false tribute. Ivar went the color of old paper. Carmilla did not. For one moment her eyes found Rania's across the hall. The expression there was not remorse. It was something other than calculation. You won, that look said. I didn't think you would. Rania held the gaze as long as she needed to, then looked away. Conditional service, Rania said, before the sentence could be announced. 5 years in the human districts, Crescent Lane, the outer settlements, rebuilding what was taken. Justice without purpose is only punishment. We have enough of that already. Ivar knelt. He looked kneeling there, very small. Not the smallness imposed from outside, the kind you arrive at yourself when you have run out of ways to avoid the accounting. She felt something quieter than satisfaction, like putting something down that had been heavy for a long time. She addressed the hall. This empire was built on the assumption that blood determines worth. That lineage is destiny, that the daughter of a tailor has nothing to offer a council of sovereigns. I drafted 17 treaties this council cited for a decade. I carry a bloodline, your oldest texts say, appears once every 4 centuries. Not in a noble house, but in a girl from Crescent Lane. Merit over bloodline is not a philosophy, it is a correction, and it begins tonight. Afterward, Rania sat on the East Terrace steps, the same place she and Caleb had stood weeks before, when she had looked away from the loneliness in his eyes because she wasn't ready to see it. She was tired, the good kind, after doing something that needed doing for longer than she realized. She heard footsteps. Caleb sat beside her, not at the careful distance of the early weeks, just beside her, the way people sit when they've stopped managing the geometry of their closeness to someone. They were quiet for a while. "You didn't look at him when he knelt," he said. "I didn't need to. I wasn't doing it for that." "What were you doing it for?" She thought of the ivory button, her mother's hands, 4 seconds to unmake 3 years, and how none of it had unmade her. For the person I was behind that curtain, who thought she was nothing because someone told her so. She deserved better, so I gave her some. He reached into his coat and set something on the step between them. The ivory button. "I've been carrying it since the map room. I should return it." A pause. "Unless you'd prefer I keep it." She looked at it, then at him. "Keep it," she said. Something in his face moved past careful, past guarded, into something warm and steady, and built, she thought, to last. She leaned slightly. The distance closed, not with any grand gesture, with the quiet settling of 2 people who have been moving toward each other long enough. His arm came around her shoulders. She let it. Below, the city's lamps burned on. Eclipsara felt different now, not in the stone, in the air, the particular quality of a place where something held very tightly for a very long time has finally been set down. The palace felt different now, or perhaps she did. If you've ever let go of something you'd been holding too long, and found that your hands were finally free, Rania knows exactly how that feels. For her, her mask was simple, her spine was not. How charming! Humans only know how to write letters, don't they? Good heavens! She said that in front of everyone, every single person in that room. Rania turned. "I wrote the Halvith Border Treaty, the Aremian Accord, the Bloodline Taxation Amendment of the Third Council, 14 additional documents whose language you quoted in your own petitions last spring. Which letters were you referring to?" The silence that followed was the good kind. Then Ivar Lockwood walked through the door, Carmilla on his arm, the engagement ring catching candlelight like a small act of cruelty. Rania went very still. She had told herself she was prepared. She was not. She pulled the old blood-red ring from her pocket, looked at it once, dropped it on the marble floor. The sound, small, sharp, definitive, silenced a 6-foot radius. That belongs to the past, she said quietly, and turned away. Calith's hand came to rest lightly at the small of her back. Not possessive, just there. She didn't move away. That was the first crack. Behind them, Carmilla's eyes followed Calith's hand. Not jealousy, calculation. They found each other on the east terrace near midnight. Frost on the stone balustrades, the kind of cold that clarifies things. How long have you been making yourself smaller so other people could feel larger? The question landed too close to something she kept covered. She thought of her mother's kitchen, the lamplight, the sewing table, hands moving over fabric. You don't have to be loud to be right, Ranaya, but you do have to be present. Since I was 23, she said, since I figured out this empire runs on bloodline, and mine wasn't the right kind. I was human once, he said. She turned. Not for a very long time, but I remember what it felt like. A room full of people who had already decided what you were. It doesn't stop feeling like that, even after 300 years. And 47, he added quietly. I stopped counting for a while, then I started again. Why? He looked at her, and in his red eyes, she saw something she hadn't expected. Not power, not strategy, loneliness. Ancient and particular. The loneliness of someone who has watched everyone they knew become history. She looked away first. Stop it. This is a contract. 1 year, you are here for your mother and nothing else. It arrived the next morning, no seal, slipped under her door before dawn, smelling of Carmilla's perfume. Step aside. 1 word, and the tailor's shop on Crescent Lane is gone by morning. You have until the next full moon. CV? Rania read it twice, folded it, looked out at the pale sky, the same sky her mother was under, stitching someone else's garments, not knowing her daughter had traded one danger for another. She pressed the ivory button once, twice. Then she sat at the writing desk, pulled out clean vellum and began drafting. Not a treaty, something more dangerous. A strategy. Carmilla thought she was dealing with a waitress clearing tables at someone else's banquet. Useful for a moment, easily dismissed. She was about to find out what 3 years of invisible labor actually built. And just when she thought she could trust again, the past returned. Not with a knock, but with a match already lit. Have you ever had to fight for something twice as hard just to be seen? Tell Rania you're with her. Drop a comment below. 3 weeks after the investiture ball, Rania went home. Not as a duchess, not with a retinue or a formal announcement. She went in a plain gray coat with the collar turned up. On a morning when the city was still quiet and the baker on the corner of Crescent Lane was just opening his shutters. The air smelled of bread and cold stone and her own history. She had missed it more than she knew. Her mother was already awake. She always was, risen before the light, with her tea and her fabric, and the small rituals of a life built from careful hands. She looked up when the door opened and her face did what it always did. That immediate, uncomplicated warmth that receives you as you are. You look different, her mother said. Rania sat at the table, the same worn grain under her palms, the same smell of thread and lamp black, the bolts of cloth stacked along the far wall, the old workbox by the lamp. I feel different. Her mother poured tea without asking and sat across from her and waited. Present without pressing. I was wrong about what you meant when you gave me the button. Her mother tilted her head. I thought you were telling me I could do things alone, that ordinary hands were enough on their own. She curled both hands around the cup. You were telling me the opposite, weren't you? Her mother was quiet a moment. "I was telling you what I learned the winter your father was ill, when I was too proud to let the neighbor women sit with me. 3 weeks went by, and I was cold for all of them when I didn't need to be." Rania thought of the map room, of Lumi in the doorway, of an elderly advisor who had waited 18 years for the right two people to be in the same room. "I brought someone I'd like you to meet," she said. Her mother looked toward the door. Caliph stood in it, not as a sovereign, not with any weight of empire, just a tall man with silver in his hair, holding a cloth-wrapped parcel, a bolt of silk the color of winter moonlight, chosen because Rania's mother had once mentioned she had always wanted to work with it and could never justify the cost. He set it on the table. "She speaks of you often." Her mother picked up the cloth and ran her thumb along the edge, the way she tested all fabric, for weight, for truth, for what it was actually made of. "Sit down," she said. "Tea's still hot." Just like that. No titles, no ceremony. A man who had ruled an empire for 3 centuries, sitting down for tea at a kitchen table. I don't know why that hit me so hard, but it did. That night on the Shadow Spire balcony, under the crimson moon, they completed the eternal union, the final seal of what had already, in every way that mattered, long been true. A small ceremony, the ancient circle, smaller this time, drawn in the space between two people who had stopped needing much distance between them. The red light spread from where their hands met, moving along the old stone balustrade like a pulse finding its rhythm. And the whisper she had heard the night she signed the contract returned. Blood calls blood. Balance the two species. This time she let it settle. "I waited 347 years, Caliph said quietly. "Was it worth it?" He considered it with the seriousness he gave everything. "Ask me again in 100 years. The corner of her mouth moved. "I'll hold you to that." Below, the lights of the human quarter and the vampire districts burned side by side. Not yet equal, not yet fully healed, but warmer than before. Changed in the small ways that precede large ones. A human name on a council document for the first time in 60 years. An old bloodline law quietly amended. A girl who had once carried other people's credit, now standing with her own name on everything she had ever written. Lumi watched from the inner doorway. "Light found darkness," she said softly, "and together they are rebuilding the empire, and for the first time in 347 years, the vampire king did not face the dawn alone." And she finally understood. Not in the grand way of ballroom speeches, in the quiet way, at a kitchen table over tea still hot. Worth is not assigned at birth, not by blood or name or the opinion of people who have never had to earn anything. It is demonstrated in the choices you make when you are tired and frightened, when the path forward requires giving something you weren't sure you had left. Love, the real, lasting kind, is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to stay present anyway, to sit with someone in the cold, to pour tea and wait without pressing. The ivory button had always meant this: beautiful things come from ordinary hands, and ordinary hands are not meant to work alone. This story reminds us that it is never too late to be seen for what you truly are. Not by the whole world, but by the people at your kitchen table. The neighbor who keeps the porch light on. The grandchild who sits beside you on a Sunday with no agenda but to be near you. If you are somewhere in the later years of your life and the rooms feel larger than they used to, the meals cooked without thanks, the years you showed up while someone else was celebrated, the work that bore another person's name. None of that was invisible. It was only waiting for the right accounting. And sometimes the accounting comes in the smallest moment. A grandchild who looks at you across the kitchen table and says, "Teach me how you make this." That is your investiture ball. That is where you stand and speak and let your name be entirely your own. If Rania's story reminded you of someone who deserved more than they were given, share this with them today, not tomorrow, today.